Hello, I'm Sketches.n.Scrubs. Thank you for tuning into this video. I'm going to be going through my top tips for doing a gouache portrait with a darker skin tone by going through this tutorial step by step with you. I've linked timestamps here for those of you who want to skip to the bits that you find more useful to be able to do that. To give a bit of context, I did this challenge with @Stormy Artistries and I'll put a link to her Instagram down below, and we essentially decided to try and do 30 gouache portraits in 30 days, and this was one of the portraits that I did that I decided to actually capture in a speed painting. I learnt so much in doing this portrait in particular and others that I thought it would actually be useful to post it as a video tutorial. Things that you'll need initially are a pencil and a piece of watercolour paper to do the initial sketch. And what this sketch, which I'm too ashamed to say how long it took, is actually trying to demonstrate is that you really want to sketch the structure of the face, the bright areas and the shadows, and I'll show that a little bit later. Another tip is to take a picture of your sketch. And that's just because sometimes it can be quite confusing as you're painting and you may kind of lose the structure, so it's good to have something to refer back to. You'll also need some gouache paint, and I use the Himimiya Art Gouache, which I've linked down below in the description, as well as a link where you can get it from. Some water in a cup, and then some paintbrushes. I used 3 for this, so a flat or bright brush for the skin because it's really good for blending, a big round brush for the hair, and then a small round brush for finer details. Okay, so now that you know everything you need, let's talk about colours. To mix darker skin tones, you'll need 4 main colours plus or minus white. They are called different things in different sets, which is why I've put down some names in brackets, but essentially it's earth yellow, ochre or burnt sienna, burnt umber and cobalt blue. And a mixture of these colours is pretty much what's going to dictate the skin. Now in my sketch you'll see that I have 3 areas. The hatched areas are going to be the shadows, the kind of white plain areas that are going to be my midtones, and the areas that I've circled that are going to be the lightest areas. So this is what I mean about using the sketch as kind of like a key. And as you can see, I get the darkest areas by having more burnt umber and a little bit of ochre, and I chose not to add blue because I wanted the skin to be really warm. My midtones were primarily ochre with varying amounts of burnt umber or earth yellow, and the highlights were the earth yellow with a slight amount of ochre, and in some people this is where they would add white as well to kind of get different tones. So this is a kind of like a simplified approach to skin tones that I use. There are lots of other theories, but this will get you started. So now that we kind of have that on board, let's start painting. So initially I just like to do a wash of the midtones or the ochre all over the face, and kind of leaving it incredibly light in the areas that I've highlighted as the areas that they'll be the brightest, so that's the forehead. Then I start doing the darkest areas, primarily with some burnt umber and some ochre, commonly known as burnt sienna. So again, knowing where my darkest areas are going to be, now I start adding the midtones. So again, primarily with the umber, aka burnt sienna, in the middle areas, and this is kind of the reason that I like using the flat brush. It's just very good for blending, so I'm blending as I'm going along. Then the face kind of started looking a little bit flat to me, so I started adding even more of a burnt umber rich brown. And then you'll also notice that the more layers I'm doing on top, the thicker I'm making the paint. So the first layer was very watery, and then I had more paint and less water, etc, etc, building all the way up, and that's how you layer gouache. And then I pretty much work on those 2 areas, so the midtones and the shadows, using the flat brush to blend, and working progressively towards the middle where it's going to be the lightest areas, which I'm doing here. And then I kind of do the same thing for the neck, this time starting with the midtones and then adding the shadows. So again, being flexible, using the flat brush, really blending. And now I'm going to switch over to the small round brush so that I can use it to add shadows and highlights to the areas of the face, just to define it a bit more and colour in the eyebrows with the wash of ochre that I'm going to paint over later on. The reason I didn't do it earlier is because I didn't want to lose track of where exactly they were meant to be, so I didn't want to just blend the entire face. For the faux locks, I use the bigger round brush and just use varying colours of ochre, black and burnt umber, and using the body of the brush to kind of represent one faux lock. Here I'm doing the lips, so using red and burnt umber as well, and leaving a bit of white because I want it to be glossy. For the eyes, I use a bluey grey to paint the cornea because it's not going to be completely white, and then I use the umber to do the iris of the eyes. Now I'm going to paint the background before adding the finishing touches to the face. So adding the lines on the lips, the pupils, the eyelashes, making sure that they're kind of individual curved strokes. And then also adding the eyebrows by adding straight individual strokes over that area of brown. For a final finishing touch, you can either use a Posca pen or white gouache to add highlights to the eyes and to the lips to make them bright. Let me know if there's a particular part of the face that you'd want me to focus on. But for now, let's recap on all the tips that we've gone through. First of all, use thick/watercolour paper for gouache. And that's so that you can layer effectively without the paper breaking away. I actually used acrylic paper, which is why it was quite difficult to layer at times. Remember to include shadows and highlights in your sketch and use it as a key. Third, take a picture of your sketch because it can be easy to kind of lose track of what's going on. Use bright or flat brushes for the skin because they're really good for blending. We've discussed the 4 colours plus or minus white for dark skin tones and to get different tones. The base layer of your gouache should be the thinnest, i.e. most water, and the top layer should be the thickest, i.e. more paint and less water. Every so often, take a step back from your painting. It's helpful for perspective, and I guarantee there'll be one thing that you will notice that you should change when you can see the bigger picture. And then last but not least, just keep practicing, keep experimenting, keep having fun with it. I promise you, every single piece you'll get a lesson from it if you really try. I hope that you enjoyed this video and that you found it useful. I do have different skin tones that I also painted, and I'll be releasing those videos later on. If you haven't already done so and you found this video helpful, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and notification bell so that you can catch the tutorials, vlogs and paint alongs that I'll be doing. Bye!